It's now time to get into the splining and polish pass. This is when we get into higher detail with our timing and spacing. So we've got this blocking animation all in constant keyframes. It looks nice, it's got some weight, it's got some attitude. Now if I switch this over, all these keyframes, switch them over to Bezier interpolation, you can now see the animation suddenly looks really floaty, and it seems to have lost something. And it's actually easy to get discouraged at this stage, because you've done all this work and you seem to go backwards a little bit. Well, actually all that's happened is now looking at the animation at 24 frames a second. So it's like looking at the animation in higher resolution, but Blender is filling in the blanks for us. All the information about what's happening between the keyframes is being generated automatically by Blender. So as an animator, it's now time for me to get in and define what's going on there and get rid of this floatiness, this automated look. And we're going to do this mainly in the graph editor. So it's a good idea to just check out what the graph editor is looking like right now. Let's select all these controllers. So check it out, there's keys everywhere, it's like spaghetti. And a lot of these keys I know aren't necessary, because as I've been blocking, I've been setting keys on the whole character, even when I'm not animating some of these controllers. So there's an easy fix for cleaning this up before we really get into the splining pass, and that is by selecting all these channels and just pressing the O key. Now I could have also done that in the graph editor, it works just as well in the graph editor, but it just becomes very obvious what's happening here in the dope sheet. Blender has just cleared out all the needless keyframes. So some of these controllers that weren't animated at all now only have a single keyframe at the start, and the other ones, when the keyframe wasn't necessary, they've just been removed. So now as I go through in my graph editor, it's going to be a lot cleaner and easier to use. So the other thing is, as we look at our splined animation, just look at all the problems that need to be fixed, it's easy to get overwhelmed. So really the best approach is to get in and just split everything up into smaller tasks. This actually applies to any complicated task you want to do, is just to split it up into smaller tasks, and it just makes it a lot easier to deal with. So the first bit I'm going to deal with is just where he jumps across the alleyway. I'm just going to refine that, try to make sure that I can get that sort of momentum happening that I had in my blocking pass. So that's only about 25 frames. If I define a preview, it's about that. So I've only got a few things to deal with. I generally start with the torso. So it's a good idea to actually generate a motion path and just keep an eye on what's happening with the arc of motion. Now, as I adjust this torso, I'm expecting particularly the IK controllers to suddenly start looking a bit weird. That's alright. This is all part of the polishing process. So on this torso, I actually want this to be a little bit higher here. I want him to sort of have a bit more bounce as he comes off that roof. In a run cycle, this would be the up extreme. So I don't actually want it to be as high as this previous up extreme, because he is jumping downwards, but I still want it to be higher than this key here. So it's going up, and having adjusted that, I can now see what I need to do here. It sort of informs me as to what to do here to make that arc of motion nice and realistic. I want to describe a bit of a parabola. So as the gravity takes hold, so it has this parabolic arc coming down. And here, I think I'll actually move him backwards. So here we go. So now we've already got a bit of a nicer arc. I'm also going to do this in the top viewport. Let's have a look. Yeah, you can see it sort of wiggles around a little bit. So it's a case of trying to smooth this out. And I think I can just do it from here. Just work through. It should be almost a straight line, because pretty much he can't change direction in the middle of the alleyway. Sort of while he's floating through air, it's very hard to change direction. So certainly not wiggling around like he was. Now I need to have a look at this rotation on the torso. I've got a bit of a rotation happening in the Z axis. You can always just double check what axis to adjust by clicking on the gimbal. So this Z axis rotation seems a little strange. He seems to do a bit of a kick. Like he rotates there and then stays where he is. So let's go and find the Z rotation. And sure enough, you can see it in the curve. He sort of does this sudden rotate and then stays where he is. So I'll just actually adjust that. I'm actually going to ease into that rotation a little bit and make sure he continues rotating around. And then coming back again, he seems to sort of like swing back very quickly, when actually it's only at this point that I need him to be at that rotation. So I'll just adjust this. This is all because as I'm blocking, I sort of duplicated some frames, didn't adjust the rotation, and so some rotation gets held over a few poses. So while I'm here, I might as well just double check the other rotation. I haven't really adjusted the Y rotation. But I just want to make sure that on the W, I'm going to do a similar thing. Just smooth it out a little bit. In general, rotation should be fairly smooth. Location also, but you have a bit more of a jerky motion when you have like foot contacts and stuff. But certainly with rotation, you want to actually smooth out the curves. So always double checking it in the camera viewport. So I think ignoring the issues with the IK feet and also the upper body, just looking at the gross body motion, I think the torso is looking pretty good. So now I can actually go on and polish some of these other things, particularly these IK feet, because having adjusted the height of that torso, you can see now I've got an overextension, and in general the foot really needs a bit of help. So let's just calculate a motion path and just really check out what's going on. Well, you can see we've actually got a bit of a strange sort of anomaly happening here. The foot sort of kicks sideways as it comes off. That'll be something that I just missed in my blocking, so I'll just move that over. And the feet can actually describe a bit of an arc. They don't have to be a straight line on this jump over, because basically they're going to be swinging from the body. Now I want to just adjust this rotation as well. Let's keep an eye on this as it comes over, because after all of this I'm going to be adjusting the pole target, which always needs to be adjusted after you tweak an IK controller. Always important to keep an eye on the pole target. And all of this will be affected by both the hips and the position of the IK foot. So let's see how this is working. I think it's coming out too wide here. So that will be in the Y location. I'll just single in on the Y location. Yeah, and sure enough, you can see it should actually be over here. Now, one thing you might notice is the motion path didn't update then. This is what happens if you just tweak things in the graph editor. It doesn't automatically update the motion path, so you actually have to manually do that. But you'll also notice that when I was tweaking in the viewport, it does. So just something to bear in mind. And now let's have a look at that rotation. It's sort of a little bit unnatural at that point. So since I'm tweaking it, let's have a look at what I'm doing to the curves by doing that. See if I need to smooth that out. So pretty much this is the polishing process. You're going through body part by body part. As I say, breaking it up into smaller tasks and just tweaking things in both the graph editor and the viewport and keeping an eye on the arc of motion. Now, I've got an overextension here. I need to fix this. I think this foot should actually come forward and rotate back a bit. Make sure I'm not overextending, but also make sure I'm not relaxing too much either. I need to hit that sweet spot between an extended foot and totally relaxed foot. Okay, so here we go. Actually, this is got a bit of a strange feeling to it. I think this foot actually needs to go a little bit higher. So I'm going to actually introduce a new keyframe. Maybe like here or something. Actually, something like that. There we go, that's improved it. Always keeping an eye on the camera viewport to see how it looks there. I think the biggest thing to adjust now is this IK pole target. Now that I've done so much tweaking of the IK foot, kind of need to really keep an eye on this. So let's go through pose by pose. I think it's too far over here. I'm going to straighten out that leg. And something like that. As he's landing, his knees kind of knock together a little bit. They sort of go inwards. So I want to avoid that. So here. So keeping an eye on the camera viewport. So obviously you need to still adjust the right foot, but you can see already how that's improved it. It's lost some of that floaty feeling, and that's really the process I follow. Just go through body part by body part. Next up, I'm going to adjust the right foot and then start polishing the torso and head, because you can see there's actually some issues that need solving there as well, just to make it a little bit more, I don't know, convincing. But this is the process I'll follow. I'll continue the rest in time lapse and come back to illustrate a few important points later on. So now I'm just adjusting the right foot just as I was with the left, making sure the arc is nice, the rotation is more or less smooth, and once I'm happy with that right foot, I'll then go in and adjust the pole target and make sure that the leg is not bending in strange ways. And then after that, adjusting the upper body. So now I get to the bit where he grabs the pole, and I just want to make a few notes about switching between IK and FK. So getting to this section where he lands on the fire escape, I just wanted to make a few notes about switching between IK and FK. So the first one is to do with the curves. As you can see here, the arm is being controlled by the FK chain, and here it's the IK chain. But in between, we've got this strange sort of average state. And as you can see, we're at 50% between the two. So both sets of controllers influence the arm, but neither set of controllers influence the arm 100%. So it's pretty much unadjustable. I can't really fix this pose. So the way to get around this, and I'll actually do it to all the IK controllers, is I'm going to find the IK FK switch for each of these and just set them all back to constant. So now what I have, it's a strange pose, but I can actually fix it, whereas before I could not adjust this at all. And of course, a quick way to fix it is to give the FK chain a good destination pose. So I'll just snap the FK to the IK and set a rotation. Now as I polish and adjust the IK controller on this pose, I always want to make sure I update the FK chain so it has a nice transition going in. So that's the first tip. The next one is to do with this section down here, where he lands on the second fire escape. So if I grab this FK chain here, get to the point at which, where it's IK, and I'll snap FK to IK, set a rotation keyframe. Well, you can probably already notice in the curves that something is not quite right. We've suddenly jumped a long way when it really wasn't that big a change in pose. So what's happening? Well, you can see the in-between. Something's gone really crazy. And actually, if I was to drag this keyframe out, you can see the arm is doing this really weird sort of propeller 360-degree rotation before arriving at that point. So what's going on? Well, this is all to do with the fact that I've got isolate rotation on the upper arm, and so that means the upper arm's rotation is now relative to the root controller. And as I've gone around this set, Clive has actually done 360 degrees in rotation by the time he's reached here, including the upper arm because of the isolate rotation. However, the IK controller hasn't. So when I snap the FK to the IK, it's snapping to 360 degrees out of alignment with the rest of the body. And so the in-betweens get all mixed up like that. So that's just something to keep in mind. This is something you may well encounter if you try to do a shot like this. Fortunately, it also has an easy fix. But all I need to do, since I know that we've turned 360 degrees, is I just have to rotate in the Z 180, set a keyframe, and you can see FK chain has gone to a really strange position. Now I'll just rotate it again 180. So we're doing that incremental rotation thing I showed you before. And now it should be in the right position. And sure enough, you can see, I'll even drag it out just to show you that that's a more or less stable pose that I can actually work with now. And the rotation is correct. So those were the two little tips. I'm going to be applying them all the way through as I continue on in my polish pass. But first, I've got this quick tip about dealing with rotation in the graph editor. So we've got this one controller that's set to Euler rotation, and that's using degrees as its units. And we've got this other controller that's set to Quaternion rotation, which uses radians as its units. And as you can see, they're on entirely different scales. Degrees sweeps across hundreds of units, whereas radians only between -1 and 1. So they're on completely different scales, and it makes it very hard to navigate the viewport when you're dealing with two controls at once. So the previous way I suggested of getting around this is to go to the Scene tab and switch all units over to radians, and that pops everything into about the same scale. However, there's a new way of doing it. They've added this new checkbox to the graph editor called Normalize. So if I switch back to degrees, I can now see everything in the same sort of view, because it just normalizes all these curves to between -1 and 1. And the advantage of this, well, there's a couple. Firstly, we're now dealing with just degrees again, so I can actually, in the Euler rotate, even in the Quaternion rotation, actually I can, if I want to numerically type in, say, if I want to rotate 180 degrees, I can just type in 180. And whereas if it was over in radians, as it would have been before, if I wanted to rotate 180 degrees, I would have had to type in, well, pi 3.142, so on. So yeah, that's one advantage. Degrees seems to be a bit more intuitive. Most people understand degrees better than radians. The other one is that we can now, whereas like this controller is leaping all over the place, these curves would normally, if normalize is off, will be all over the place up here. Normalize puts it all in the same thing. So we're now not only being able to deal with Quaternion and Euler rotation, but also location, all in the same graph editor viewport. So this is actually a much better way to work. So yeah, just quick tip. Now on with the polish. So on with the blocking. Here I'm making sure the arms really work as they grab the rail, making sure the IK FK switching is working and that we've got a nice extension as he comes in, so really show that he's taking the weight. Same with as he's pushing off. I've adjusted the arms a bit, made a start, but actually I pretty soon realized that I'm going to have to adjust the torso, and so always start with the torso because that affects everything else. So I've made a motion path and I'm just tweaking that whole arc of the motion of that torso to make sure he looks like he's got some weight and that gravity has an effect on him. Now here, silhouette is very important. It's actually very important for physical animation in general to make sure that the body has a clear silhouette and the audience can really see what's going on. But here in particular, because the character is a long way away, the camera is on the ground, so we really want to make sure that it's clear what's going on and that the character looks like he's got weight and is doing things with force. And the way to do that is to pay attention to what the silhouette of the body is doing. And yeah, that if you can sort that out, I mean, I'm giving you these tips about paying attention to the arc of motion. All this stuff's very important, but it all has to support a good sequence of silhouettes. That is really what the audience will see. They're not going to pay attention to individual body parts. So here, another tip I can give, I've actually sort of mentioned this before, just offsetting the feet. As he's landed on the windowsill, he has more or less landed with both feet at the same time, but I have offset them by 1 or 2 frames. Same with the kickoff. And this actually helps give a nice organic feel. Offsetting the hands as they land on the fire escape is a similar effect. Basically, bodies very rarely move in a mirrored way. There's always a little bit of offset, even if it's more or less a mirrored sort of action. The body still has a little bit of an offset, and that sort of gives it an organic, naturalistic feel if you can do that. So there I am, making sure that the FK arms have a good target point and that they land nicely. And I'm actually, as I started playing around with this section here as he comes off the windowsill, introducing a few new ideas. I've actually got the right arm swinging around in a different way to what I had in the blocking. That's fine. The blocking isn't actually set in stone. You want to sort out as much as you can in the blocking, but if an idea occurs to you as you start polishing, it's perfectly fine to start introducing some new ideas. Just don't totally redo your animation, otherwise you'll be lost in the splines and end up with a mess. So yeah, as I say, blocking very important, and here we're trying to deal with detail, but if we need to, we can change a few things. So this landing in particular, as he's sort of shooting off that fire escape, there was a lot of work in getting these arms right, because he's actually going off at an angle. You can't really see it from the camera viewport, but there was something strange about it. So I had to really make sure that that angle worked by looking at it in a different viewport, making sure that the thing worked at a different view. There's a tendency to animate just to the camera, and it is important to keep an eye on the camera viewport, but you also have to just double check in other views as well, because that can quite often inform you where your problems are. If something looks really strange in a different view, then there's probably something that's not going to look right in the camera view as well. So yeah, always animate to camera, but always pay attention if there are problems to what's happening in all viewports, like top, left, all of them. And here I am doing the jump off from the canvas. I had to do a bit of imagining here. I haven't really got the rig together yet. That's in the next phase. The rig for the canvas itself and for the set in general. So I'm sort of imagining what's going to happen, and I've tried to make that jump off look as realistic as I can, as if he's really interacting with some canvas that's going to be interacting with him too, sort of bouncing back. So yeah, there was a bit of backwards and forwards there. So as you proceed with your polish pass, this is actually potentially one of the more difficult passes, mainly because it's easy to get a bit lost and to start looking at it over and over again, and you're almost in what's called the uncanny valley. Most of you have probably heard that phrase. Basically, the closer you get to reality, the weirder it looks. You end up staring at your animation over and over again, seeing something is wrong, but not knowing what it is, and it's just a little bit strange. Well, this is very much the territory you're in when you're in the polish pass. So really the thing to do is, firstly, we'll go and get some advice, as I've mentioned before. In this case, I've actually got some notes from a couple of friends of mine. I actually sent them a clip of this video and just said, hey, have you got any notes for me? To my friends Francesco and Hjalti. They gave me a few notes, and I've started to, that it was good, fresh pair of eyes. So that's one way to do it. Another way is to get up and walk away from your computer. Stop looking at your animation and just get away and give yourself a set of fresh eyes. So when you come back, you might actually just see the problem very, very quickly. Because yeah, polish, it's very easy just to get lost and get frustrated. You've got so far, but it's still looking a little bit strange. Why is that? Well, keep going, keep persevering. It's all practice. Basically, the best tip I can give you for learning animation is to approach it as if you were learning a musical instrument. So if you were going to start learning the violin, you would expect to practice, wouldn't you? You'd expect to spend, maybe half an hour every day. I don't know what it is with violin, but anyway, you'd expect to spend time daily practicing, and that's pretty much what you should do with animation. It is like playing an instrument. It's developing a skill that you don't have. It's developing your eye so that you can see and fix problems, and it's just looking at things in a slightly different way. And that really, there's only so much I can teach you in this tutorial. The rest has to come from practice. So yeah, it's fun though, and don't let me discourage you. It's a lot of fun to animate. So here I'm trying to get him to describe the arc of motion very, very clearly, because that's such a fast move that by this stage we aren't really going to register individual body parts at all. We're really just going to see a smear across the screen almost. And so I really want to make the body really conform to the arc of motion of the torso. So you can see I've adjusted continually adjusting the hands, the arms and the feet, just to really make sure that the body conforms to the arc of motion as much as it can with the standard controls. I'll show you a little trick later on that I can really tweak it even further. So now we're getting into the landing, and this is actually where we're starting to get into subtlety. So clearly I want him to have a bit of physicality there. I mean, part of the thing is he's landing into after doing this amazing, very physical move, he's landing into basically a still position. But I still need to have him doing a little bit of a settle, because he still is a physical character, and you need to have a bit of overlapping motion. But at this stage it's getting into really sort of subtle sort of territory. And so to make that work and make it look like he's snapping to a still point, but then still, alive and working, was a bit of a challenge. There was a lot of backwards and forwards. And actually that section there, just after he's landed, is a good example of what's called keep alive. Now, keep alive is a term used by animators for the section of a scene where a character isn't doing much. So it might be a secondary character, or it might just be the main character who has to pause for a moment. Well, that bit can actually be very hard to do. Those sorts of sections can be very hard to do, because you don't want your character looking like a statue. You want him to still look like he's alive, but obviously not doing heaps of action. And that's actually worth practicing. Just have your character breathing and looking around, and just do something that isn't a specific action, but just looks like the character's alive. That's some of the hardest parts of a scene that you can do, actually. So here I've got the dual action of the arm coming down, the left arm in the background, and the right arm coming up. But clearly I want the audience to focus on the right hand, because that's the main point of this section of the animation. So there was a lot of backwards and forwards, particularly with that left arm. So once I'd sorted out that right arm coming up and settling nicely, I just wanted to make sure that move was subtle enough, not too crazy, as to draw attention away from the right arm. It's very important to think about where you want the audience's eyes to sit. And yeah, after that I'm getting into the facial controls. Clearly I want to give him some attitude. So Clive doesn't have any major facial controls, you just have minor tweaks. But that curve that you just saw there is my example of a standard blink. I outlined it quite clearly in previous tutorials, but yeah, that's my starting point for blinks from which I polish. So yeah, I'm not going overboard, but doing a bit of facial stuff, and clearly doing things in a rapid way, so that the blinks and also the brow animation all move really quickly. They're like micro muscles in the face, and they move very fast, and there's not much overshoot or anything like that you would have in a full body. You do things in sort of quick darts, particularly this character, because I want him to look really alert, you know, and he's got a bit of a reaction to the fact that he's just landed in wet cement. But anyway, we're nearing the end of the polishing pass, just a few more tweaks to do, and we can pretty much call this finished. So we're getting close to finish now. You can see at this end of the polish pass, everything's looking snappy. It's got more detail, the arcs of motion are clear. I mean, we could still keep polishing this almost forever, as I've mentioned, but I'm going to, for the purpose of this demonstration, call this more or less finished. I'm just going to do some final tweaking. So, as I mentioned in the description of the new Clive rig, we actually have these new controllers. Thanks to the Rigify plugin, we've got these new tweak controllers. It will enable me to do little tweaks like this, where I can just get the legs just to... This is actually, I mean, that would be a broken leg in real life, but they call this breaking the joint. It's a little trick that animators do. They'll throw in a frame or two where the leg goes in the opposite direction, but it supports the arc of motion. So to the viewer, it actually just looks a little bit smoother. You can't really tell that the legs are effectively broken. But anyway, that's just a little tweak I'm going to add. And now I really think it's time to have a look at this camera, because it's become distracting. This is basically still the layout camera, and I have tweaked it a little bit as I've gone because I've retimed the animation, but yeah, essentially this is just the first pass of the camera, so it's really time to get in and have a good look at this. Make sure that we really feel that the cameraman has a brain and doesn't know what he's going to be doing. So here it looks a bit like an anticipation. His reflexes are just that little bit too quick. So I'm just going to, yeah, there we go. And here, I actually want to use the breakdowner and just move that back. So it looks like the cameraman's getting surprised by that little jump off the fire escape. But I think I'll actually drag that back just a little bit. Yep. And then at the end, once again, just delay. Actually delay that one too. Yep. Could use a little bit more. Maybe I'll try this. So he almost leaves frame, but still. Now at the end there, I actually want to, he sort of hits a wall, the cameraman hits a wall, and so obviously the camera also obeys the laws of physics and can't just stop like that in a robotic fashion, so I'm just going to make a little bit of an overshoot, and I'll just duplicate this key and just pull that target down a little bit. Yeah, maybe. And then I'm just going to introduce some noise, basically. I'm just going to move the camera a little bit. Right up until the end. The ending is now at 210 frames, by the way. So I'll just see how that looks. Yeah, so you get the idea. Camera animation is an art, as I've mentioned, and I could easily spend a long time polishing this. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to call this finished polish pass and move on into character finaling and effects.